Give us your sense of where the leadership in the country is coming right now on the question of what we should do about guns in the wake of that tragic Florida shooting.
Well, I think obviously we had a horrific event, which one of these events is way too many. So I hope there's action in Congress. I support taking action in Congress, but not just on the gun issue, but also to really look at this Nicholas Cruz's life and how did a mentally deranged individual like this get in a position to kill 17 of our most precious assets, our children? And where did he fall through the cracks when it comes to that mental illness that he clearly had? Where did it come through the cracks with law enforcement not taking him out of society? So I think that's the conversation that has the best chance of maybe helping solve this problem, and that's where combining these two together maybe for once it gets something to the president's desk and signed into law.
And Congressman, as you suggested, it's clearly right. There are many things that went wrong here. It was not just that he had a gun, but that he had certain mental difficulties. By the way, there are questions even being raised about law enforcement and the job they did down there, those deputies. Right. But my main question is, when you come to Washington, is this something Washington can handle? And if so, is the leadership going to come from the White House or from the Congress?
I believe it has to come from both. And that's why I so appreciated the president inviting the families up and having a conversation face to face in regards to these individuals. And I think it moved the president. I think the president heard their message. And now it's incumbent upon our leadership in Congress to act on this. I've called for action on this issue. But it cannot just be about attacking our Second Amendment rights. I believe in our Second Amendment rights. I'm a staunch supporter of our Second Amendment rights. And we can have a conversation about background checks and improving the system. But we also have to look at fundamentally what caused the risk that fell through the cracks that allowed this individual to do what this heinous act resulted in killing 17 of those precious kids.
When you say having conversations on background checks, does that mean that you could support expanding them?
Well, I think first make sure that they're working. Make sure that there are systems in place that are getting the appropriate data, that they're functioning. I think that conversation is a healthy conversation, and I'm open to that conversation. We talk about potentially improving the area of that, then maybe we can get to somewhere. But you got to couple it with the mental derangement issue, the mental disease issue, the violent propensity that Nicholas Cruz exhibited, and how did we miss that as a society?
Mm-hmm. Congressman, let me now turn to trade, because Treasury Secretary Mnuchin has talked about potentially the United States rejoining the Trans-Pacific Partnership. You opposed the TPP when you were supporting other free trade deals. Why is that?
Yeah, because I thought, being part of that process and being on the committee that's responsible for our trade relationships, that they were negotiating in order to meet the deadline of the presidential campaign. And when you're under an artificial deadline, like our former administration was coming up to in regards to the expiration of their administration, they were giving away things in those negotiations. They were giving away positions of the United States for their own purposes to fulfill the deadline that they had imposed upon themselves. So I was very uncomfortable how they negotiated that. I think we need to go back to the table. I think we need to look at things like NAFTA and TPP, and when we go to the table, we need to come at this from a perspective of harsh negotiations, aggressive negotiations, and putting American interests first on the table, and then negotiate from that perspective.
So, Congress, just to be clear, we no longer have that deadline. So you, in principle, support Secretary Mnuchin's efforts to at least explore the possibility of going back into TPP?
I believe, yeah, that is an appropriate, healthy conversation to have. And when you look at the world economy and you recognize that 95% of the world's customers live outside of America's border, we need to have trade policy that opens up those markets across the world. But you have to do it in a way that doesn't damage us long term as a nation and jeopardizes our security as the United States of America. And that's where the former TPP negotiations were going, and that's why we opposed them. And we want negotiations that are going to be firm and get rules in place that are enforceable.
You continue to talk about conversations, but even if you went back to the TPP negotiations, now all of the other 11 members have made an agreement. Do you expect the United States to get anything from them now that the only thing that they need to do is ratify it?
Well, if those 11 countries don't recognize the value of the American economy, you look at the opportunity that the American economy represents to them, and they don't want to participate in that, I find that hard to believe. I think they'll want to negotiate with us, and now we have negotiators that are going to stand firm and negotiate in a business perspective as opposed to a political perspective.